It's the Acting Income Podcast with Ben Houck, episode 19, Why I Went FICOR.
It's the Acting Income Podcast with Ben Houck. Turn your passion into income, Ben will show you how. With all the resources that you need to make it as an actor in an expensive city. To stay balanced and make money, you really can't go wrong with actingincome.com.
Welcome to the Acting Income Podcast. I'm Ben Houck, and on this podcast, every week we learn about earning an income as an actor and all its facets. Many thanks for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed yet, click the subscribe button on iTunes or in your podcasts app, and you'll get weekly episodes as they come out. This is episode 19, titled Why I Went FICOR. The show notes for this episode have all the important links referenced in today's show, which you can pull up right now at actingincome.com/episode 19. And now, on with the show. In episode 10, I recapped the first 9 episodes of the Acting Income Podcast. At the end of that recap, I shared with you my relationship with acting and my union status. The stay tuned question I asked at the end was, will I declare financial core status? Well, as you can tell from the title of this episode, something changed for me over the course of the past few episodes, and that is my union status. I have declared financial core status within sag-aftra jurisdiction. In this episode of the podcast, I want to describe to you my journey in going FICOR, why I made the choice, what sag-aftra might do to better prevent someone like me from resigning my union membership, and how you can weigh your own decision whether to join the union, stay union, or go FICOR. But first, a disclaimer. While I have declared financial core status, for me it was a personal decision. In no way, shape, or form do I advocate for you or other actors to go FICOR. For you, as I see it, it is a personal decision as well. However, I am interested in your having objective information about financial core that isn't confused with opinion against it or opinion for it. From my research, there's a lot of propagandizing about FICOR, which really makes it hard to decide whether to stay union or go FICOR, and it leaves actors with a nice amount of wrong information. So I've set out to educate actors about financial core to make their decision to stay union or go FICOR easier. The union currently promotes on its webpage about FICOR that it has facts about FICOR. Well, I aim to provide better facts. So, why I went FICOR. First off, I never thought I'd be an actor who'd do that. I'm a proud person, I'm an overachiever, and I've been able to make a consistent income, earn pension credits, and qualify for health insurance as a member of sag-aftra. I'd long understood getting into the union was hard to do, so getting into it in the year 2000, soon after moving to New York City for my acting career, felt as if I'd won a race. I first heard of financial core from a lawyer friend of mine sometime in the early 2000s. I didn't quite get it at the time, and it sounded a bit scandalous, and at that it sounded like an unprecedented legal gymnastic trick that would put me on precarious footing in my acting career. I did some research after that conversation with my lawyer friend, and while what he said seemed to add up, it sounded very fringe and not something I thought it wise to do. Granted, I was early in my professional acting career and not in the place where I am now around a decade later. I was greener, more hopeful, optimistic, and again, prideful. I prided my union membership as if it's a trophy you strive for, beyond which point everything just becomes easier. Fast forward to about a year ago, the summer of 2014. My life was different. I was 38 years old. In the years between my conversation with my lawyer friend and then, I'd gone from the office worker who's been on Law & Order, who'd auditioned occasionally and who did some occasional background work, still holding on to the hope of getting another principal role. I'd evolved by 2007 into a corporate improv teacher who taught in NYC, Toronto, and London, who eventually had a book published on long-form improv. And by 2009, I had transitioned into doing background acting and stand-in work on a consistent basis. From 2009 until 2014, I was still doing background work and stand-in work, even founding a website about standing in back in 2010. But after 5 years of background work and stand-in work, I started to complain. Not about being able to make a steady income, but that I didn't have time to audition for the work I wanted to do. The principal roles, the speaking roles, the real acting. I would land long-term stand-in jobs that meant I couldn't audition. By 2014, I was looking for ways to mix things up in my career so that I could still generate an income, earn toward health insurance and pension, and also have time to audition for real acting jobs. It then started to hit me. Really hit me. I didn't want to die a stand-in. That's not why I moved to the city. That's not what I got my degree in. I came here to act. I didn't want to die not having acted. And the sag-aftra prohibition against my acting was putting a strain on my morale. In the larger sense, my union membership was preventing my acting, but let me qualify that statement. As a union member, I was disallowed from working in non-union productions. I was only allowed to work on union productions, so I work on union productions. So what's available to me are union jobs. Most of those union jobs are background jobs and some stand-in jobs. Union principal roles are hard to come by without an agent, and while I had management and freelance agency representation, the auditions were few and far between. I mean, in the choice between waiting around for an audition to come and taking stand-in work, I would take the stand-in work or else not make an income, or let the chances of losing health insurance or a pension credit increase. So I'd keep taking background and stand-in jobs, and when auditions would come up, because I didn't want to jeopardize my relationship with background casting directors, whose happiness with me helped me pay my bills, I would sometimes have to turn down the random, out-of-nowhere audition. More accurately, it got to be that I would rarely even seek out union acting jobs because they were so infrequent that it wasn't worth the time to search, and it was more worth the time to seek out paid background and stand-in work. So the cycle was complete. With almost no union principal jobs and a lot of background and stand-in work for me that paid decently, I got trapped. And I couldn't see any way to break the cycle to do acting. But there were a ton of non-union acting jobs. One of the main websites for actor self-submissions, Actors Access, was mostly non-union acting jobs. Union acting jobs were so infrequent that I rarely visited the site. So when there were union acting jobs, obviously the competition ratcheted up, or it was for a fringe-type role, like for twin 3-year-olds, and I couldn't get in on the action. Now, some non-union jobs paid, some did not. All of them, though, I couldn't do. So even if I wanted to act unpaid on a project, the union wouldn't let me even do that. It becomes a bit hard to work on your craft when your union disallows you from pretty much even doing it. But paid or not, I started to see non-union work as my salvation. Now, can you believe that? After all these years hearing about union as better than non-union, how could I see being non-union as being better than union? Well, for me, over the 14 years of being in SAG, then sag-aftra, I almost never could truly act. I couldn't audition for the union jobs that involved true acting because I was trapped on set doing background and stand-in work, working under the threat of losing health insurance or a pension credit. And I couldn't do true acting because I was more or less just a background actor or stand-in, which the union's 2005 agreement doesn't even consider a performer. And I couldn't do true acting if I had an opportunity in non-union, unless, of course, through Herculean effort, I tried to make the job union, an effort that in most cases would have assured my not landing the role and essentially not acting. What was the point? Why, as an actor, would I join a union to not act? This was the question I started to be confronted with. I had signed up for a union that prevented me from working on my craft in a practical way. I had to sit happily not acting. Somehow I had to see it as proud to turn down paid non-union acting work and not act. If I died and served the union interests by never accepting non-union work, but also never acting, what kind of life is that? Would the union salute me for my non-achievements? You can see the crisis for me was becoming existential and ontological. For me to be an actor, I really had to act, speak on camera or something of that nature. And I needed my existence to involve acting, not acting, not serving union interests that prevented me from acting. So I started looking more seriously into that thing my lawyer friend told me about years prior. Financial Core. I covered Financial Core status in episode 7 of the Acting Income podcast, which is linked in the show notes. And in that episode, I interview Financial Core actor Ricardo Lori. The short of it is that Financial Core is a United States Supreme Court-backed right to pay a union only for the services of collective bargaining and related activities. When you join a union as a member, you have to abide by their rules. And for sag-aftra, that means you have to abide by their rule that you can't work non-union anywhere in the world. It's called Global Rule 1. But when you declare Financial Core status to that union, you do not have to abide by Global Rule 1 or any of the rules. So you can work both union and non-union if you so choose. At some point, I figured out that when you're FI-Core, you're still eligible for health insurance and pension. When people learn that, usually the next question is, why isn't everyone FI-Core? That I'm still eligible for health insurance and pension made FI-Core a better option for me because these were important benefits to me. So the question then became for me, how would my career change if I went FI-Core? I put a lot of time into answering that question. I looked up what union services I would lose if I went FI-Core. I looked at what union perks I would give up if I went FI-Core. I looked at what professional harm might come if I went FI-Core, and whether the claims about FI-Core that vocal people on the internet made had any merit. I emailed an agent for her perspective. I even called the union. The option to go FI-Core was very, very, very attractive to me. And yet I was on the fence about it. One of the last things I wanted to do was investigate a claim I saw online that some agents will not work with FI-Core actors. So I emailed a high-profile agent with whom I'd freelanced to see whether that was the case with her. She did work with FI-Core actors, but when I told her how much I'd worked as union so far, her reply to me was, in all caps, "If you are working, you should not need to go FI-Core." That reply was convincing. It meant I did not go FI-Core then. Maybe I was looking for an easy out of a difficult question. However, I knew I'd reconsider FI-Core in the future because it was seeming more and more rational for me to choose it. And less than a year later, I started reconsidering it. On April 29th, 2015, SAG-AFTRA launched its Best in the Biz campaign, also known as the Commercials Organizing and Recapture Initiative, a noble enough campaign to recapture more non-union commercial work for union actors. I hadn't visited the union much, but as the host of this podcast about acting income, I thought it would be a good idea to see what the union had to say and was doing. The union put together a packet of information called a toolkit, in which it offered up some of the myths non-union actors apparently have about union membership, as well as what the union called facts to dispel those myths. It also showed a comparison chart of how much money union actors make versus non-union actors. I've linked to the toolkit in the show notes so you can have a look. What I couldn't get out of my head while listening and reading was that while union actors made more than non-union actors on similar projects, a lot of the time, non-union actors were still making decent money. If I were a union actor who turned down work because it wasn't union, and if a non-union actor took the work instead, that non-union actor ends up with money. And I don't. But perhaps more irritating to me was the union's semantic play. As a strategy unveiled in the meeting, the union introduced the term pre-member. Pre-member was the term to replace the term non-union actor. If you've seen the term pre-member suddenly crop up in union publications, it's probably because it's their strategy at work. The word is aimed at seeing non-union actors as eventually joining the union as members, that they just need to be educated that the beliefs against union membership that hold them back from joining are false, and then they'll join and pay the hefty initiation fee and become a member. At that April meeting I attended introducing Best in the Biz and the Commercials Organizing and Recapture Initiative, there was a question and answer section toward the end. I was in New York's local, where we received a stream from the national headquarters in Los Angeles and other parts, and there they handed out pencils and cards on which to write any questions we had. My question was along the lines of this. The term pre-member presupposes there is such a thing as a post-member. Financial Core actors might be thought of as post-members. How does Best in the Biz aim to address post-members during non-union commercial work? I turned in my card, but we never got to it. Mostly because, streamed from the national headquarters feed, we heard someone in their audience, off camera, yell out, FI-Core! I don't know what that was about, but it created a hubbub that stalled the meeting a bit. Financial Core sounded as if it must be a hot topic in the Los Angeles area, or at least for this union member on the Los Angeles side of the meeting. The executive director at first didn't want to address the topic of Financial Core, but eventually he was persuaded to share some numbers about Financial Core for all who were watching the stream could learn. But this story about why I went FICOR is not so much about that meeting. At that meeting, I learned that FICOR was something immediately on actors' minds, especially in light of a commercial industry that had gotten away from the union a bit. FICOR was definitely on my mind. Then, on May 6, 2015, something changed for me significantly about my relationship with the union. I found an episode of The Naked Unicorn, a podcast out of Georgia. The episode was from October 2014, and in it, host Jason Sorotin interviews SAG-AFTRA Atlanta local president Rick Reitz. The interview is innocuous enough, but for someone like me, a trained actor who has not been acting when in the union, but been doing background work and stand-in work, it put new perspective on who I was to the union and whether this union really is interested in me. In the interview, which I've linked in full in the show notes, the SAG-AFTRA local president repeatedly characterizes the union. Here are some of the snippets from that interview that really hit home.
But when you want to make a motion picture, and I know that you're busy trying to turn out your own product now, is you're going to need stars. Without stars, you're not going to get distribution. And all the stars, with the exception of some reality people who sort of pop in and pop off the map real quickly, like the Real Housewives.
They're all SAG.
Well, if they want to be on the talk show circuit,
right,
they have to be. Here's the magic formula. You want to know what the magic formula at the end of the day is for stars?
Yes.
For them to qualify annually for insurance, individually, they're trying to make $15,000 a year. That's all it takes for an actor to qualify for insurance. $15,000 a year. To qualify for your family, $30,000 a year. And there are people, if you want a star, and you know that you're near their end of the year and they haven't done a film this year, offer them $30,000. They'll do it. Stars weigh in. It works. When Tom Hanks walks in and says, "I want XYZ," he kind of gets it.
Yeah.
And if he speaks on behalf of all of us and said, "This is fair," everyone goes, "Well, Tom Hanks said, yeah, it must be fair." Kind of thing. That's how good he is.
And I think the bottom line is, if you want to do a major product with a major release, with a major chance of distribution, you're probably going to need SAG and AFTRA.
Well, at that level, you're going to need stars, and that means SAG-AFTRA.
Stars, 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 stars. After hearing that, I was seeing stars. But I wasn't seeing myself. Do listen to the interview in full if it interests you, and if you think I'm taking what he says out of context. After listening to that interview, I felt a bit icky, de-winded, punched in the gut, nauseated, and other demoralized feelings. Why am I in a union that is for the benefit of stars? Granted, leveraging access to stars means getting better working conditions for myself and better pay. I get that. But it doesn't mean getting access to me. I am not a star. My interview with Ricardo Lori in episode 7 helped me see that. I was fooling myself. So I stopped seeing myself that way. I was a worker, and I wasn't working. Surely I was doing jobs under union jurisdiction, but that's not the same as working. My acting is my work, and the union's rules were preventing me from getting that work. The Rick Reitz interview pushed me over the edge, making me see the union really isn't so much for me. If it were, then maybe Rick Reitz wouldn't have hammered the point about stars so hard. After hearing that interview, I started to see that it had just become a matter of time before I actually went Financial Core. In the interim, I tested out the mindset of FICOR. I didn't submit for non-union jobs, I simply thought on set what it might be like if I were FICOR. Namely, when it props, I didn't hand over my union card. Instead, I handed over my driver's license. There was no problem, no issue. That was easy. I also noticed that when I pretended I was FICOR, suddenly it was the acting that became most important. Before, the union was most important. Before, I didn't care as much what the shot was, I cared more that the union rules were being followed. But when I was FICOR, the spirit of production, the spirit of telling the story and getting the job done, the spirit of acting was rightly placed back at top. This is not to say that union rules weren't important, they just weren't the priority that they had become. The acting was the priority. When I went union, I had forgotten that, because it had seemed the union was most important, more important than acting. Also in the interim, I had a lot of finer questions to answer for myself about Financial Core before I wrote a letter to the union. I did a lot more research. I didn't know exactly when I would declare Financial Core status. I figured it would be June sometime, and I would just know. Then, finally, on July 8th, 2015, I dropped my resignation letter into the mail to become what is also known as an agency fee payer. So, with that letter, my relationship with SAG-AFTRA became that of not a member, but a non-member. In declaring Financial Core status, I will continue to pay the union for collective bargaining. I'll still get to work in union productions, still be eligible for health insurance and pension. I'll just pay about 3 or 4% less than I was paying the union, which means I'll still support the union financially. I'll even still support the union ideologically, at least where its ideas don't diverge from mine, which was the case when I was a member. But in declaring Financial Core status, I'll lose some pretty nice privileges that come with union membership. But for me, what I gain in going FI-Core trumps those nice union privileges. It was not easy deciding to forego those privileges. For example, I won't be able to vote in elections, and as I was weighing FI-Core, I noticed I was taking even more of a political interest in the union. But eventually, the interest in working again edged out the union privileges, not to mention the union rules that prevented me from acting and doing the work I desperately wanted to do. What happened afterward? The morning after I dropped my resignation letter in the mail, I went on a bike ride in Central Park. In one sense, I was the same person. That was a little odd because going FI-Core sometimes sounds as if it's a genetic alteration. It's not. It was another day. But in another sense, it was a new day, and I was different. How so? I was free. I had regained my capabilities. I now couldn't settle for not working, not acting, not having jobs to submit for. Now I had all of those jobs on Actors Access and casting networks to try for, to submit for, to potentially book, in order to feel happy and fulfilled again doing work, acting work, no matter if it was union or non-union. In going FI-Core, I was no longer a member, and I wasn't suddenly a pre-member again. I was a post-member. It was as if joining the union and being a full-fledged constitutional member was a rite of passage for me. One long time of believing in something as the next and ultimate step for my professional acting career, when in truth, it was a long time believing in something that wasn't what I thought it was, that took me away from what I wanted to be doing. Joining the union was great for my income, but it wasn't great for my work. It stalled my work. It was as if giving up non-union work for all those years was a waste of precious time for me. In going FI-Core, it was like stepping into my body again. I started submitting for union and non-union work. It wasn't long before I had some auditions, ones that wouldn't have been available to me were I still a union member. Within a week and a half, I even booked a commercial, which I had to turn down. But I also continued doing union background work and stand-in work. There was no perceivable difference. But there was a difference in the sense that I was now more flexible as an actor, and I had more potential. Now my creativity as an actor and the ability to apply my talent to jobs was not limited by union rules. My entrepreneurship could be tested and broadened. I could use my acting talents for personal business endeavors. I could still work union jobs, but I could now also test the non-union and entrepreneurial waters to see how I might be able to expand my ability to work as an actor without the union saying, you can't do that unless it's a signatory. Now, as I said earlier, as I got closer to going FI-Core, I was becoming more politically interested in the union, which meant it was almost becoming a conflict of interest to want to vote, but to give up my right to vote. I've been conflicted about the ability of my vote and my voice to influence contract change. As editor of Stand-In Central, I tried to get the union to negotiate for a daily wage for stand-ins working under the network code rather than an hourly wage. I got radio silence on that point, and the agreement passed without that change and despite my no vote. I've also tried to advocate for the safety and compensation of stand-ins working in scenes wherein drone cameras are used. It's still to be seen what kind of industry change might happen as a result of my drone safety campaigning, or what kind of disaster might happen in spite of it. But in having a site that advocates for stand-ins, and now a podcast on acting and income, I have a bully pulpit to influence votes. And I realized that in going FI-Core, I might give up my one vote, but I might be able to still influence others' votes. So in going FICOR, it's sad to lose my vote, but I wasn't sure that it mattered, and what may matter more is how my audience votes. That said, to aid in my decision-making process about FICOR, I decided that I should attend union functions to develop a more rounded perspective of what the union is and what my local can offer, in case there was something big I was missing that I would regret not having were I to go FICOR, and in case getting more political was more rightly in my interest than resigning the union. In addition to the Best in the Biz meeting, I attended a June 26th follow-up meeting about the progress of the Commercials Organizing and Recapture Initiative, and I also attended a June 27th new member orientation, which probably sounds a bit ironic. I wanted to go to the new member orientation because I never attended one back when I joined in 2000, and I thought maybe there would be angles on what the union offers me that really would persuade me away from FICOR. There was a ton that the union offers members for sure, and they are worth their wholehearted exploration, a topic I hope to cover more in the future. Sadly, though, nothing presented by the union pushed back the tide for me. But also sadly, 2 new members spoke of their difficulties booking work as union actors, in stark contrast to their prolific work non-union. The union's response was, more or less, develop new casting director relationships and give it some more time. This din of desperate actors who'd worked a lot in the past continued over from the Best in the Biz follow-up meeting I'd attended the prior day. Their stories at the meeting were heartbreaking to hear. One actor model had worked lots in the past, but had mounting bills in light of fewer work opportunities as an older model. She was struggling not to choose FICOR. Another actor had made 6 figures in non-union work to afford a house, only to be confronted upon joining the union with a decimated union income and hefty house payments. I got to talk at that meeting as well. I shared my ongoing consideration of FICOR, and I also shared what had kept me struggling with whether to go. I offered up this, that for me, certain things the union offered made it hard for me to just leave. One, surprisingly, was the SAG Award screeners. They had boosted my relationship value, and that real-world conflict of interest kept me in the union. If the union could provide those kinds of member-only things that could really dig deep at personal relationships, that might keep them in the union longer. But I had believed, and these meetings confirmed, that as long as actors confronted with the crisis between honoring union rules, not to work non-union, and paying their bills as responsible adults, FICOR is not only going to be an out for them, but it's also going to be the responsible thing for them to choose. If the United States Supreme Court backs the right to declare financial core status, and if in going FICOR actors can act again, making money in non-union because they can't get union work, then union opinion against FICOR really has little sway. And it even starts to sound inhumane, working against the worker rather than for it. At the new member orientation, I heard one union representative say to an actor that if you can't get union work, maybe you should do something else. While that sounds as if it's coming from a right place, it's an acting union advocating a member to not work as an actor, which borders on disgraceful. Which brings me back to my story. Could I do something else other than acting? Sure, I could, but that's not what I want to do. And if FICOR is an option on the table that will help me get to doing what I want to do, why act as if it's not an option available to me? If FICOR is available to me, why stay in the union and not act? Can I legitimately call myself an actor then? Just because I'm in a union? No. Ricardo Lori drove home a point for me. Union membership is not the goal. Acting is the goal. That's what I want to do. Joining a union pretty much stopped me from that goal. Going FICOR would help me get back on track. So why tell you all of this? If you're a union actor who is a proud union member who has listened with open ears to what I had to say about why I went FICOR, I really commend you, and I thank you. I hope you've profited from my insights should you feel the need to bolster the incentives to keep constitutional members in the union. Do bolster your ranks. And if you're a union member who's given some thought to FICOR, what I've said before is no reason that you should go FICOR. That is purely your decision. And I don't know what factors in your life and value system lead you to make decisions that are wise for you. But I do know that while the decision to declare financial core status can be made swiftly and without cautious regard, I did not take it lightly, and I weighed it from many different angles. The internet is scattered with different opinions, facts, and opinions masquerading as facts on FICOR, which makes it incredibly hard to discern what is true about FICOR and what is false. To solve that problem, I've put together a workbook on FICOR that'll walk you through as many facets as I could think of about FICOR for screen actors, so that when you finish reading it, you know whether you want to join the union, stay in the union, or declare financial core status. It also has some hard-to-find stats on just how many actors are FICOR, what you should do just after you go FICOR, and where to seek help if you have trouble as a FICOR actor. The workbook is titled The FICOR Workbook, and it's available at ficorcentral.com. It doesn't interest me whether you go FICOR or not. What interests me is that you're armed with accurate information about FICOR. I've taken great care in providing tons of information in this ebook, in just over 60 pages of plain language. I really want you to walk away from it feeling that you know as much as you can learn about FICOR, so you can make the decision for yourself, and so you can educate other actors with accurate information so they take to considering it. So, if you're contemplating FICOR, or if you want to learn more information about financial core status, download the FICOR Workbook at ficorcentral.com. Thank you so much for listening. And that's the show. This episode was sponsored by the FICOR Workbook from FICOR Central. To download the FICOR Workbook, visit ficorcentral.com/workbook. The show notes for this episode are available at actingincome.com/episode 19, where you can also leave a comment on this episode. You can also find Acting Income on Twitter and Facebook. Rate and review this podcast on iTunes by visiting actingincome.com/iTunes. Pitch an episode idea by visiting actingincome.com/pitch. And if you'd like to sponsor an episode, check out actingincome.com/advertise. I'm Ben Hauk. Tune in next week. And for more information, as always, check out actingincome.com.